Welcome to Trades Hall.
Okay, so hopefully that has come up, the photo of Trades Hall from Lygon Street. It's a pretty recognisable building, and it's really one that I guess speaks to the importance of the union movement in Victoria. This complex has evolved from 1874, this particular building, but the site has been occupied by Trades Hall since the 1850s. And it really kind of emerged from the 8 hours movement that was a really important achievement for workers in the mid-1850s. And workers soon realised kind of the benefit of, I guess, collectiveness and having a central place to gather and to debate and form campaigns. And it has, you know, it's a continuously operating place that's still, you know, the heart of the labour movement in Victoria. So Lovell Chen involvement started in 2016 when we prepared a conservation management plan for the site. And the CMP is one of the most kind of involved documents that we work on in the heritage side of the office. So it's a really in-depth analysis of the history, the site as it exists, and sort of undertaking quite a detailed assessment of the significance of the place as well.
And I guess, sorry for interrupting, what I was going to say is the value of a CMP is to really understand the place in terms of its cultural heritage values, but also looking at the place in terms of its fabric. So what is the building about, what it's made of, and looking at other sort of conservation related issues as well.
Yeah. So we did an assessment of the significance of the place, both in terms of its context in Victoria, but more broadly nationally and also internationally. And it became really clear that this is a very special building, very special place to the labour movement, and unique as well. Nowhere else has such a substantial and intact Trades Hall. And part of the CMP as well is really establishing, I guess, the relative significance of spaces within the building. You may have already read on the blurb on the website that this has evolved from 1874 to 1963 in 10 stages, and they reflect really the health of the union movement through this period, and the growth as well, that there was a constant need to add more accommodation for the various unions that occupied the place. So we're going to talk about, I guess, initially the old council chamber, which we worked on, and then the new council chamber, which is now known as Solidarity Hall. Just going back to the CMP, part of that arising from the significance of the place is developing policy relating to the management of the place.
Yeah, that's right. And I think when we develop policy around conservation and management, we also look and consider the aspirations of the building owners and managers. So Victorian Trades Hall Council obviously are very much proud custodians of this building. They recognise the value of the building to the community, to the Victorian community. But they also realise that it's valued in other ways, not for just for the trade union use and association. That we now have an association with the building through the Fringe Festival and Comedy Festival, and other bars and public spaces that are used and accessible through different festivals in Melbourne. So some of the future uses that we needed to accommodate, and some of the aspects of use that we needed to accommodate and consider in the CMP that then informs any of our future conservation work, is understanding what, as I said, the aspirations of the VTHC, Victorian Trades Hall Council. And so that was very much about continuing access and a community engagement. And so that means the building needs to be of a contemporary standard. We need to think about the implications of services and access, and what are those implications related to fabric and the management of fabric and valued fabric for buildings when you start planning and designing works to the place. So I'll just throw back to Libby because this is a really fantastic picture of the first 3 stages of the building.
Exactly. So this photograph is in the very late 19th century. And this was the earlier presentation of Trades Hall to Victoria Street. Now, in the mid-20s, a new structure was built right up to Victoria Street and obscured this section of the building. So this is the original 1874 section of Trades Hall. And in this, you know, it was quite a small building in comparison to what the complex is now, but it housed spaces for offices. It had a library, and it had what was known as the Friendly Society meeting room, which in the mid-1880s was reconfigured to become the council chambers. Now, when we arrived in 2016, this is what the council chambers looked like. So when it was designed in the mid-1880s, it was a really richly detailed space, had lots of motifs and detailing that kind of pointed to the symbolism of Trades Hall. It picked out some, I guess, what we would term allies of the labour movement, and really, you know, spoke of the health of the movement at that time. By the time we arrived, the really heavy Victorian detailing was, as you can see, very obscured, and it was quite a plain space. So I'm going to jump over to the virtual tour, so hopefully that works.
I think one of the things I'd like to add, when we first encountered Old Council Chamber, there were little glimpses of evidence of the original or early decorative scheme. So areas of paint had been removed in a localised way to expose different aspects of the early decorative scheme. So we knew that there potentially was something underneath. The extent to which we could salvage or remove overlays of paint to reveal early decorative schemes was a little bit unknown at the time of writing the CMP. So part of the role of the CMP is to identify what we know about the place or about the space, and then develop policy around actions to reconstruct or restore the building as a whole, and sort of fairly detailed policies around conservation as well. But as you can see with the image that Libby's sharing, this is the reconstructed decorative scheme from about the 1880s of Old Council Chamber. We're looking north in the space at the moment. And I think what we can really see is a lot of fabulous work by the Grimwade Centre for Cultural Materials Conservation. They were really instrumental in helping us as an office to reveal and then understand what the scheme was, and then make decisions around the extent to reconstruction, revelation, and other conservation actions that we needed to undertake. There's some really fun aspects of this space that came out in the revealing of the earlier schemes. The 2 lunettes, which are the arched infill panels above those north doors, they interestingly survived over-painted through the entire occupation of this space by other unions and groups and for use at the comedy festival. They were heavily varnished, and the varnish had yellowed quite considerably, so the detail was rather lost, but we knew that there was something there. And these lunettes, I think from memory, Lib, reflect knowledge and education. I think they're metaphors for growth, you know. So they're really interesting to actually have those revealed, and it also pointed to the level of decoration that we were also going to uncover. Within the frieze, which is the upper painted and decorative stencil band just beneath the cornice, we also knew that we had portraits of important people, and Libby is pointing to, I think that's George Higginbotham, and
yep.
And George was, as what we would call an ally of the union movement. So he was really, I think, as a justice, really important in promoting the union movement as someone not within it, which I think from a community point of view is really quite interesting as well. A lot of the work that was undertaken in this space, as I said, was about revealing earlier schemes, but also working out the ability to how to reconstruct the scheme in a way that really represented the scheme, as we only had one image of that space before, contemporary to its original decoration. And so being a black and white image, it was really difficult to discern what colours were on the walls, what tonal treatments were on the walls. And Lib's just popped out for a second to show us the next.
Yep, there we go.
There we go. So that's, yeah, so this is a really fantastic picture. In terms of trying to understand the treatments in the space, we rely on documentary evidence. And so it was really lucky that we had one really great photo, which was pretty telling. It was really helpful in trying to understand what was there. But as I said, it doesn't really give away colours, but it was a really excellent evidence and really useful evidence for the conservation team in terms of developing a response. But I think just as an underlying philosophy in approach for Old Council Chamber, it was very much an approach on reconstruction of the decorative scheme. We were really trying to get to a point where the whole of that space would read cohesively. We have some evidence of the early decorative scheme still revealed around as part of the broader reconstructed stenciling to the wall. So the area that Libby's pointing to at the moment is a rectangle of early paint stenciling that was concealed behind a timber memorial honour board, which I think was a World War I honour board for the Bakers Union from memory. And that had been in place from, you know, probably the mid-20s, and the walls had been painted around it, new schemes applied, the original scheme concealed. And when the honour board was removed, we actually had physical evidence of what that decorative scheme was. We could look at the colours. CCMC, you know, developed a colour palette for us that would represent the scheme appropriately elsewhere in the space, but we decided to retain this snippet of the original decorative scheme in its somewhat sort of mottled and washed out presentation. But I think it's really important to say that, to me, it's a really lovely silhouette of the original scheme as well.
All right. Well, should we see if there's any questions?
No, we've got no questions at the moment. No, everyone's being very diligent and polite and listening. I think just other works that are part of a conservation project that you don't really often think about, Chandeliers and Lanterns. We had new chandeliers reconstructed or constructed that reflected the original detail. Obviously they're not gasoliers, they're electrically powered, but the original rosettes were retained, and these were repainted and repaired and repainted in the original decorative scheme. So to see them, to see the space with replica fittings really is quite amazing. It actually really gives you a proper sense of what the Victorian scheme would have been. It's not as densely furnished as a Victorian occupation for Old Council Chamber, if you recall that black and white image. We've got different seating in the space now, but this seating is actually still relatively early. What we know is that the original velvet and gilded seats went into the new council chamber, and at some point timber seats and tiers were, or the floor tiering was retained, but timber seats were introduced. But just as part of the whole project and what we think about when we think about conservation, the repair works extended to the repair and varnishing of the seats. So I'm not sure if you recall the earlier image of the building of the space in 2016. The seats were worn out. Everything was looking pretty dull and ordinary. So this is a really distinct change. The other thing that we look at when we are talking about conservation and restoration projects is, as I said earlier, looking at code-related issues, so DDA access, safety. So with Old Council Chamber, the windows are very close. So the bottom sill of the windows is very close to floor level. And with this, we needed to ensure that people couldn't fall out the window if the windows were ever open. So one of the interventions that we had to look at was installing a barrier to the exterior side of the window, so a glass panel that was just as discreetly as possible installed to ensure that the windows could be operable, so we could get natural ventilation back into the space, but also ensure that occupants of the space weren't exposed to additional safety issues. We also look at other lighting as well. You can see there are contemporary light fittings and smoke detectors in the roof, in the ceiling, but all of these elements are really kind of discreetly placed and really go to how to make an early space usable in current times. We do have a couple of questions, and one of them is actually really fantastic. And it's what do the columns in the corners represent? Those columns that you can see are actually tubes, and they're called Tobin tubes, and they're a 19th century ventilation system. So it was a painted system. You do see them in other Victorian buildings in Melbourne, and particularly governmental buildings. They don't often survive, and that's another really intriguing aspect of Old Council Chambers. In a sense, once it stopped being used for council chamber purposes, really all the subsequent overlays were really quite sort of cosmetic, and which meant that elements like the Tobin tubes remain. But Tobin tubes are about drawing air through external ventilation grills to the exterior face of the building and drawing air into the space. So part of our work was to obviously repaint and repair these. And you can see they've got a lovely little gilded crown at the top. They're really sweet. So all very much part of the decorative scheme of the place. We also have another question, which is, if there have been lots of previous decorations, how do you choose what year you take it back to? Well, and this is always it's a really important question, and we'll get to, and I think it's a philosophical one. From a heritage and conservation perspective, it really depends on what the most significant period of occupation of the space is. So, and often there is a debate. Sometimes you think, well, maybe it's more valuable to go back to the earliest phase of decoration. But for this project, the values of Old Council Chamber really lie in its use as the chamber for unionists, for trade unions, and that for us is the most relevant phase of its usage. So if there had been an early 20th century scheme applied over the top, we wouldn't necessarily think that that's the most valid scheme to reinstate in this space. But that might be a perfectly acceptable response in another space. And we'll talk about different philosophical approaches to conservation when we look at New Council Chamber shortly, as we've approached that a little bit differently. Libby, is there anything else that we can add on Old Council Chamber?
No, I mean, I think on that point about, I guess, choosing which phase of decoration, as I mentioned, this particular scheme is about, 10 years after the construction of the building. So it's not the original scheme that we've gone back to, but as Suzanne said, it's really about looking about what's the most important, I guess, use of the room, what's it known for. And it actually was only used as the main council chamber for not much longer after this. In 1890, another wing was constructed on the building, and in that there was a new council chamber for that, which was a much larger space. So Trades Hall outgrew this space pretty quickly, but it was kind of a high point in that original section of the building. We had good documentary evidence about it. We've got that photograph, we've got newspaper articles describing it. And it is really, I guess, about looking at what's most important about that section of the building. And so that's why we went with that. But we can probably move on because I realise time's kind of getting away from us already. Before we head to the new council chamber, I thought we would just show you, if I can get there with this screen, a really nice little section that just really shows, I guess, just how well loved this building is, how well used, and how it has been for, you know, nearly 150 years coming up to. I can, sorry, get my computer to take us there. And I think, you know, we've got evidence of lots of offices being constructed, various small and large trade unions. I think that's something we don't really think about with unions now, is that they seem to be very large groups of people, but in the 19th century, they could actually be really small. And so you had lots of tenant unions sort of with really specific kind of trades that we're relating to. So lots of people kind of intermingling in this space. We get to this set of stairs in the first section of the building. Sorry, I'm just having some technical trouble. And it's just a really nice, I guess, in a kind of conservation sort of sense as well. You get, sorry, very slow computer here. Slow. In the treads on these stairs, you actually get really deep grooves in the stone, which really kind of is quite evocative. It speaks to hundreds and thousands of heavy boots having run up and down the stairs for, you know, decades really.
You can just see it on the left-hand side. That's, I think, if you go back a little bit. Yeah. And it's really fantastic. I think, as Libby says, it's evocative of the engagement of trade unionists with the building, and, you know, I think you can imagine the footfall on the stairs with the amount of wear and tear that we can see. So that white curved taped in section, which is to notify you that there is actually a very big dishing in the floor. So the wearing has actually caused a semicircular gutter as people have run up the stairs, hand on the balustrade, flung around to the next flight up, and, you know, regain their footing. So there's something really telling about the space and the traces that people leave in the space over time. As a conservation action, if we were to make this stair compliant, we would have had to have taken out the whole stair. And that would be an incredible loss for this space. The loss of original fabric, the loss of evidence of usage, really not something that you would really want to support from a heritage and conservation perspective. We were able to keep these stairs in their existing condition while ensuring that people were able to access and use it safely. But the retention of the stairs, I think, is a really important aspect of the way we try and understand, I guess, endpoint in the way we try and understand a place, and then use that information to make decisions around the conservation and future management of the space. So we're aware that, you know, it's you know, has issues in terms of compliance, but we also weigh that up against you know, what is it about retaining and expressing those values, and providing ongoing sort of physical interpretation of the space as well.
Okay. We got questions, or are we?
No, people are being very quiet. So feel free to just add questions to the chat line. I'm keeping an eagle eye on them.
Now,
so
the new council chambers, I'll see how I go getting us over there.
You're going to be okay, or do you want me to do that?
See.
Well, you have a go, and then. So this is.
We're all over the technology.
We're all over the technology. No one employed me as a computer specialist is what
Here
I
we
say.
go.
I did want to say that Libby and I have been working on this project from the beginning with the CMP, which we prepared with our principal, Kate Gray. I think it's one of our favourite projects, if I can kind of speak on behalf of both of us. We've both really enjoyed the process of understanding it and actually getting through the end of stage one and seeing the culmination of a whole series of work for us with the conservation management plan, and then through working with the architects and design team in our office, and then also running that parallel with our approvals processes that we take through to Heritage Victoria and working with Heritage Victoria as well. We should say that the stage one project was funded through the Heritage Council and through a heritage grant. So the really important aspects of the project, it's not really just about having a new building at the end. There are a whole lot of steps that have to be undertaken to get to this point, and it begins with a CMP, and permits come along the way, and then more engagement as the works are underway as well.
Okay, so we're now in new council chamber, which, as I said, was constructed not long after old council chamber had been redone in the mid-1880s. So this is an 1890 section of the building, and I'm not sure if you saw the floor plan. It's kind of towards the back, but it was a really substantial new build for them, and again just speaks of the kind of health of the union movement in the 19th century and just how much space they required, that they kept having to expand the size of the building to accommodate more and more unions, more and more people in the meetings and the gatherings that they were having. So this space was used, I guess, in its earliest arrangement up until the mid-1960s, when there was a really substantial fire that caused significant damage to the place. It continued to be the council chambers after that, but there was significant change and repair work undertaken, reorientation of the seating, and covering over the original kind of walls that did remain after the fire. I'll try and see if I can get this photo of the what we came into. And get it up.
So I'll just step in.
Yeah, you go.
Well, I was going to say we have a couple of questions. So what I'll do is after we've finished talking about new council chamber, I'll go to the questions. So keep them coming in. We're interested in answering all of your questions, but we will get to them.
So yes, so basically this is the room that we came into. So this is in its 60s orientation.
And decoration.
Decoration, you can see there, the fabulous clock there. It's a 2-level auditorium. Again, I know I sort of keep harping on about this, but that period up to the 60s was, really, that was kind of the high point for a lot of that union in terms of the size of unions and the number of people that were, proportion of workers involved in unions. And they just really needed a huge amount of space. So the reorientation of the council chambers assisted with that after the fire. I'm not sure if you can see here. So there was metal panelling put up over the damaged earlier walls after the fire. And so when we came in for the conservation management plan survey, that we could just get these little glimpses of an earlier decorative scheme behind this panelling, sort of really tantalising clues that there might actually be something left from the 1890s, which is where we get to with the...
Well, I'll just, while we've got, while we had that image, but that's okay, Libby, it's fine, it's absolutely fine. What I was going to say is that, as Libby said, a new cladding was applied over the retained walls. Thank you for bringing that back. And where we could see glimpses through, what we could also see was the method used for attaching this new cladding to the original wall. And in a sense, there was a level of devastation, quite a high level of damage was evident even in that little small glimpse. And so we knew it was always going to be an issue from a construction point of view to actually remove the cladding, but limit the additional damage to those retained sections of wall, knowing that the walls, which were masonry with hard plaster finishes over the top and paint finishes, had been exposed to fire and extreme heat, and over time, would potentially, any of that plaster finish and render finish would have potentially become more and more fireable and come off the wall as well. So there's sort of an expectation that what you find may actually be too fragile to recover in any way. But I think, in our initial physical survey, there was, at least more than a glimmer of hope that we were finding something and that maybe we could get a really fantastic outcome. And of course, finding that wall and knowing that that was there was very much a big part of the architectural response, which we'll see shortly.
Yes, so get into that.
We have a question, and it's not really a question. Someone is saying, what is that music? Is there someone talking over you? I can't hear music.
No.
No. It's not affecting me, and I don't know if it's affecting anyone else, but I certainly can't hear it. And yep, other people aren't hearing music, so that's okay. So, yep. No, I'm getting positives. I'm hearing you fines, and no, it's fine. So I'm not sure what your technical issue is. Sadly, it's not, well, fortunately for us, it's not coming from us, but yep, other people can't hear music. All right, we'll continue. I'll get back to questions about the project shortly as well.
Sorry, let's try and get...
Actually, that's a point. If everyone can actually mute themselves, I think we were meant to be automatically muted. So if you've unmuted yourself, perhaps pop mute back on, and that might... Yep. Oh, now I'm hearing it. Irene? That sounds like a radio. Thank you. Yep. Okay.
Great.
I think let's get back to it. All right. So this is New Council Chamber, now called Solidarity Hall. The refit was designed by Kai Chen, our architectural director, and the team. So it's a 21st century refit, rebuild of a council chamber, so a multi-purpose space, but a larger space. And one of the fantastic outcomes of this redesign of Solidarity Hall was that we could incorporate the remnant fabric from the north wall and really, really focus on it, and focusing on it by actually returning the northern orientation to the space, which I think is a really fantastic outcome. Lib, do you want to talk a little bit more about it?
No, I think that's if you want to talk about the north wall.
Yep, okay. Yeah, we can go to that.
I can get
we can move forward. Sorry, but I think what's really fantastic about the space is that we've returned it with a balcony to the three sides, an arcaded balcony. So there's an upper level viewing area, which is really great because you can get quite close to the north wall and have a look at the detail of the work, the retained fabric and the conservation work as well. There's also a workers' museum featured in that arcaded balcony, and if you want to learn a little bit more about that, you can join our colleagues Stuart Hannafin and Felicity Strong tomorrow for the second part of our Q&A on Trades Hall, which is really fantastic. But north wall has been was a really important part of the reconstruction of this space. And as you can see, it's a slightly different presentation than that of Old Council Chamber, which was very much aimed at giving us high quality, very much a reconstruction of the decorative scheme from the 1880s. The approach that we took with North Wall is different in that we wanted to be able to retain, I guess the expression of and the patina of the earlier paint finishes. Where Old Council Chamber, we didn't have an extent of early paint schemes to reveal. They were covered by modern and very difficult to remove paints. In a sense, the more loosely fitted cladding over the north wall meant that we would actually have more fabric to work with, although in a very deteriorated state because of exposure to fire and other damage. So in terms of our approach to conservation, what we chose to do was work with having the existing paint treatments consolidated. So that means stabilised and refixed and, essentially re-adhered to the wall. So where areas of paint were coming away, they're consolidated and stabilised so they won't come away again. And where plaster and other mouldings and detailing had been removed or broken off, we sought to actually just had a fairly simple neutral infill in that space. So we weren't seeking to reconstruct the decorative schemes or the paint work as we did in Old Council Chamber. We really wanted the north wall to be evidence of original paint treatments and very discreet new conservation measures. And you can see that around the panel, so the left floral panel, which Libby is pointing to. So there's a fairly simple neutral patch of render, which was colour matched to just sit with the adjacent paint colours. So you can see there's a tonal variation from darker to lighter in that panel. And really you can see it, but it's not, those interventions don't stand out. And that's, I think, is a really, really important aspect of our approach. Detail that had to be reconstructed, so the capitals to the pilasters. So the pilasters are the columns that are affixed to the wall. You can see where Libby's pointing at the moment, or no little pointer's missing. Yep. So you'll see that there are a number of plain finished pilasters. So these are elements that we reconstructed in detail to match, and the ones to the right of that, which are in crimson and gold, are the original decorative treatments and colour schemes. So really from a philosophical point of view, the approach is very different. And I think that goes to the question earlier about where do you decide and how do you make a decision about, what do you paint, what do you repaint, what period. This is another kind of approach in conservation. How far do you go? And what's an appropriate way of retaining evidence of early materials and fabric and being able to tell the story about age and wear and tear, and not conserving it or reconstructing it to a point that all of those really evocative traces are lost.
And I think it really works in that it's very clear if you look what the original fabric is here, but it's not trying to really scream, this is new, this is not new. It's a sort of subtle way of showing it. We're not trying, as Suzanne said, not trying to recreate things that to make them match, but just have it subtly sitting there so you can get a sense of the totality of the wall. But once you look a bit closer, you can see where the old and the new sort of fit in with each other. I was going to just point out, I guess, a little bit about Trades Hall itself. Aside from, the really important political and social campaigns that it's undertaken, training of artisans is also a really important part of its work, which sort of did lead into the establishment of RMIT as well. And the decorative schemes at Trades Hall were often a chance for the painters and decorators to really show off their skills. And as you can see, there's some really detailed painting work that's gone into this particular wall. A really nice aspect, I guess, of us being able to get really up close and personal with this wall is that we've been able to find sort of sections where individuals have actually left their mark. This little plant panel of flowers here, this is not a plant, it's actually a series of people's names. I'm not sure if I can zoom in.
It's a fern. It's really lovely. It's part of the bouquet arrangement.
Getting close enough. Yeah, so it's not sort of fern fronds or anything like that. It's actually people's names that have been left in a place that probably they didn't expect anyone to really notice.
Get up close and see.
And there's also, I guess, you know, really strong symbolism in this hall as well. And we mentioned earlier that this is all sort of really stemmed from the 8 Hours movement of the 1850s. And that continued as a strong theme through, you know, the approach of Trades Hall's work, that sort of idea of work, rest and play. And that 888 continues to be a really important kind of symbol for the movement. And is shown on that floor arrangement.
And I should say also that we've used that symbolism and we've recreated it in a new carpet that was specially designed for Trades Hall, which features the 888 symbolism in the broader floor area with a border of red and roses. So, yeah, highly symbolic of the union movement and really actually a fantastic way of using that symbolism elsewhere in other aspects of the project. Yeah. So we've got questions. One of them is taking us back to the staircase, and it's, if you choose not to comply, do you have to get an exemption and provide an alternate compliant access? So the whole process is not just choosing, so we do need to seek a dispensation under from the building surveyor to actually retain a non-compliant stair. But Trades Hall, interestingly, has lots and lots of other access ways and ways to get from the first ground to the first floor. So it's not the sole access way. One of the things that I'd just like to have a little segue on when we talk about access and DDA compliance is that Trades Hall was not compliant. There were no at-grade accesses from the main entry points prior to the completion of the Stage 1 project. So Victoria Street entry was up through a number of stairs. The portico on Lygon Street was much the same. So one of the outcomes of this project was introducing compliant access, and that was through a new chairlift in the most southerly bay of the portico on Lygon Street. So we, as part of that project, or that aspect of the project, part of the bluestone stair between two major columns were removed and a new chairlift inserted between them. A new level was applied to the portico floor, and that way there was level access through to the ground level of the south tower, and that would take you through via a corridor to a new lift. And so the project, as I said, it's not, I mean, there are really beautiful aspects of the project like Old Council Chamber and Solidarity Hall, but there are some very pragmatic aspects of the project which, you know, every day people probably won't notice, but we're very acutely aware of, and that is resolving things around compliant access, providing new mechanical solutions and fire solutions to an old building, which can be really complicated, and especially complicated in a building that evolved in 9 major stages. And has a really complicated floor plan and difficult external spaces. So Stuart Hannafin, our colleague who is a project architect, will probably talk a little bit more about that tomorrow, I imagine. Okay, so that was that question. from Ian, in restoration, was any evidence of the previous life of the site found? Not as far as I know. We didn't need to do much sub-floor digging, so there wasn't much archaeology that we were anticipating exposing in this phase of works. Libby, we knew from our documentary record what had been on the site beforehand. We knew there had been a trades hall, and I think in that very early photograph that showed the first 4 stages of trades hall, you could see a little hipped roof building beside, which was the original trades hall that stayed in place. So at the very left-hand side of the image, just above the trams, when trams ran on Lygon Street, you can see the early trades hall. So no real archaeology in this one. Stuart probably might know a bit more closely if things were found. Again, he was the project manager for project architect on this one. Now, as I work through, were there any hazards you faced, expected or unexpected? I probably can't really answer that question fully, but I can say just generally, in a site that's evolved over a long period of time, that's had overlays in the mid-20th century, you'd expect to find different hazards, but you deal with those as you work through the projects. And we have a really great question, and Libby, I'm going to hand this over to you. Are there any women honoured in the building decorations?
There are, and I think that's actually a really important thing to talk about in terms of the history of Trades Hall itself. I guess there can be that sort of idea of, particularly early on, as a very, it's the male-dominated trades that were instrumental in the early 8 Hours movement. In the 1880s, there was the Tayloresses' strike, which was a really major, I guess, turning point for the unionisation of women. The women's unions also had their own little trades hall on the site, which has since been, both that and the original trades hall building have been taken over with the extension of Trades Hall. Certainly in the Workers' Museum, I think there is interpretation relating to some of the social campaigns that have been undertaken, particularly relating to women. So that's what I was going to say with the Tayloresses Union, is that was kind of Trades Hall really, I guess, taking a women's movement into the fold and really advocating on behalf of the women, supporting the protests and the strikes that were going on. And even though I guess there was the separate hall for women for quite some time, increasingly that the women's unionists were part of Trades Hall, and there's certainly some paste ups and various interpretation around the site as well, relating to individual women as part of the workers' movement as well. So it's I know the stereotype can be about it, being the male builders, sort of building workers, particularly in the 1850s, but Trades Hall has had a long association with women's workers as well, and supporting the unions that arose from that.
Well, we've got 10 minutes to go, so it'd be really great if there were any additional questions or anything else that you'd like us to talk about. I think maybe, we have a question. Will we get into the Fringe Bar at all? Maybe, Libby, if we could maybe have a quick jaunt into the former Bella Union Bar, which is, I think, probably the most accessed space within the building, and probably a space that most people are familiar with through the comedy festival and the like. Okay, so this is looking to Lygon Street. And just on that conversation on Tobin tubes, between the windows are more Tobin tubes in a much more I guess, prominent design, being a canted kind of colonnette form. But again, Tobin tubes were installed throughout the building to provide ventilation to various spaces. The Fringe Bar, which used to be called the Bella Union Bar, which was a meeting space. It was the old ballroom and then the new ballroom. I should actually remember this off by heart, but the Fringe Bar is a really beautiful space. It's not very big, and when we first entered this space, this beautiful varnished timber ceiling was completely covered. Excuse me, with paint. There wasn't much evidence of early colour schemes. It was really, it was a bit sort of rough and ready and suited being a bar. And part of our work was a bit more light touch here, which was really about revealing the beautiful timber work to the truss system and the ceiling, and installing a fairly simple decorative painted scheme throughout it, and just making the space able to be used for future and ongoing public events, which is really
And I think
good.
that's an important part of, obviously we're showing off the conservation work that's been undertaken, but particularly with DDA and various other things, it's really about, I guess, ensuring the ongoing viability of the space, and being able to get public access into it as well. It's a really important update to the building, which hopefully will mean that, you know, it's future secure, that it's, you know, can be used by a lot of different people, different community organisations, arts organisations, the trade unions. So it's a really, really great project in that sense, not just for the conservation outcomes that have come with it.
We've got a couple of questions, Libby, and what I might ask you to do. One of them is, please show an old photo. So I'm not sure if you can direct us to an old photo of Bella Union Bar. That might be a bit tricky, but we've got...
No, I don't have a photo of Bella Union sitting there at the moment.
Okay. Oh, sorry, we can't help you there. The question from Lil, are the tubes still used for ventilation, or are they decorative now? They are very much decorative now. But one of the things that we did try to do was also reinstate an ability to naturally ventilate the spaces. So as I said, with Old Council Chamber, the windows are now operable. We can make sure people don't fall out of them, but we can use them, and those spaces can be naturally ventilated. And that was the same for the Fringe Bar. Those windows were now all made operable. So ventilation is natural and augmented by new mechanical systems, but not the Tobin tubes anymore. And we've got a question, what surprised you most about the project? And I'll put that to you first, Lib.
Sorry, what was the question?
What surprised you most about the project?
Oh, I mean, I think it's such a multi-layered kind of place, and I think that's, you know, obviously my background is history, and that was most of the work that I've been involved with. This project has been a lot of the research sort of undertaken, both for the CMP and then in conjunction with our other historian Felicity, you know, looking for understanding how the original decorative schemes were reported and that kind of thing. But it's really lovely just how well loved and how well used and how kind of dynamic this place has been as well. Like, it's constantly been extended. There's, you know, and just how important it has been in Victorian history. I think it's perhaps something we take for granted, maybe, that unions are important, but it's really actually quite rare in the Western world. If you look at places like America and the trade union movement's not nearly as strong. It had different forms in Scandinavia and in the UK, and even in Australia, the movement wasn't. It had different iterations, but what we have in Victoria is really special, and I think that's probably one of the things sort of through the assessment work that we did as part of the CMP is just realising what a unique place this is and how it really speaks to the history of Victoria and the particular time, social circumstances that, you know, that the colony developed in. And so, yeah, I think that's probably where it sits for me. It's just the importance of this place, really.
And look, I totally agree. I think having studied at RMIT and knowing that there had been a connection between Trades Hall and RMIT, and you know, and that's not just about the proximity of the two buildings and the 888 Memorial on the corner, on the diagonally opposite corner, but I think until you get to go inside and dig around and understand what makes Trades Hall tick, really it's just another Victorian building on the corner of two major streets in the city. And I think architecturally it tells a really intriguing story about growth and the expansion and desire for trade unions and support for workers' rights.
And
I think when
social circumstances as
yeah.
well. Sorry to interrupt, but I think it's important that, you know, Trades Hall, it's not just been about workers' rights. There's been some really important social campaigns that they've been a part of, both in the 19th century, through the 20th century, and even more recently as well. So, yeah.
So it's just really, you know what looks as, you know, like a sort of fairly, you know, stock standard treatment of a large Victorian building. I think there's so much more to know about it, and you know, it's architecturally incredibly reflective of the growth of the union movement, as I've said. And I think, you know, reading the building and seeing the slight difference between the stage one, and I think this is what's really interesting about the building, and hopefully next time you walk past Trades Hall on Lygon Street you'll have a look. But the one setback facade that you see for stage one has arch-headed windows, and that's the only place, that and on the eastern side facade that you see, it's the only place that fenestration arrangement was implemented. Every stage post stage one, and even into, as we said, the 1925 edition of Victoria Street, applied the exact same architectural treatment. So square-headed windows to the first floor, arch-headed windows to the ground floor, a singular frieze treatment, singular capitals plaster treatment. And so you can read, you can read the building in and the growth of the building between the first and the second stage, but not any subsequent stages, which I think is really interesting. It's coming very close to 2 o'clock. It is 2 o'clock, so thank you all for coming. We've missed a couple of questions, Nikki, Naja. Sorry, we're not able to answer those, but you can join our colleagues Stuart Hannafin and Dr. Felicity Strong, who will be talking about the actual architectural project, conservation project, and the interpretation project for Trades Hall at the same time tomorrow. So thanks for joining us. We hope you've enjoyed our Q&A and tour.
Thank you.
Thank you.